All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for attending. And I guess I'd say the views expressed here represent my views, as well as far as I can tell, the community's views at large. And we'll go through that a little bit. I do have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll pull that up real quick, so we have something besides just me to look at. All right. Bob, does that look okay on your side still?
I am not seeing it.
Says I'm sharing. Can we get confirmation in the question and answer? And it looks like it is being recorded.
Yep. So Dilo says she can see it.
Okay. Okay, great. So, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to folks today. Obviously, this is a slightly different format that isn't the greatest for public participation or sharing ideas and information, but it's what we've got. And so, happy to share ideas and information here. I think with the size of the group, I'd be willing to take questions as we go. And as Bob mentioned, that we'll have a time afterwards to have a little bit of question and answer as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the planning work that we're doing, in particular, this group of planning work that we're doing that we're calling the Strategic Infill Redevelopment Plan. It encompasses, changes to our general plan. We have an major update to our general plan. Former general plan was out through 2020, and so we're doing some big changes there. We're also taking a look at some zoning changes and just really refining our code, trying to come current with some of the state law for general plan amendments. And as we go through this, I want to talk to you about, in part, it's Arcata, it's Humboldt County. I want to focus on why we love it. I want to talk about the things that we've recognized in Arcata that we're up against in terms of providing for housing and economic opportunities. What we promised to do, we just completed our housing element, so we're going to look at that a little bit, and then how we plan on doing it. And ultimately, what I hope to do is to be able to stimulate a dialogue about these ideas. I've been talking with planners across the state. I know that a lot of folks are working on their SB2 projects, their LEAP projects right now. There seems to be a large convergence of ideas around, what we need to do as jurisdictions to provide better opportunity for housing development. And so I'm really interested to hear from you, either challenging our assumptions, criticizing our approach, giving your insights, or making recommendations for how we can make this plan better. So without further ado, let's see if I can jump through my presentation here. All right, so, Arcata, unlike, or just like most of Humboldt County, we've got lots of recreational opportunities, great place to do business, fun place to be, arts and culture. We have the redwoods. Oftentimes I forget this, and probably many of you do as well. People come from all over the world to see these things. And just the diversity of Humboldt Bay and this region as a whole is just astounding to us. In Arcata, we have Marsh and Wildlife Sanctuary, one of the first land-based wastewater treatment plants. Folks came from all over the world to see this. And so we've got a lot of great people. A lot of those came from Humboldt State University. It's a fantastic place to live. But one of the things that our community has struggled with for years, really, is how to provide adequate housing. We've constantly run into statistics like our home ownership rates in the low 30s, where the rest of the county is closer to the 40s, and the state is in the 50s, and nationwide 60s in terms of the percentage of home ownership. We also have an aging housing stock, and a lot of the new projects that have been built, most of those are related to affordable housing projects that we've secured grants from. Now that's shifted a little bit lately, but historically that's the discussion. Folks who are teachers, nurses, police officers, they have a hard time finding housing for purchase in Arcata. We have a huge student population. How do we provide for the right housing for those folks? So we recently did our housing element update, and in so doing, we did a lot of work looking at what the state was producing, what they were anticipating, And we also did a retrospective on how the city of Arcata performed. State has put out some statistics saying that they think between now and 2025, they're going to need about an additional 1.8 million units. And they felt like their expected production was going to fall far short of that, not even producing half of that 1.8 million units. In part, I think this is what's driving Newsom to, and others to, continue to put pressure on local jurisdictions to create opportunities for housing. Back at how much we had produced, and we did pretty well since 2003. We've produced about 70% or so of our RENA numbers, and a lot of that was produced, through grants that we secured to do affordable housing projects. But the market in Arcata has always been relatively hot compared to the county at large. It's a highly desirable market, and we do see housing production reflected in that. But I do think that what this tells me is that we're still 30% or so behind the curve on what our projected need is. So, moving forward, we're anticipating, continued massive housing production shortfall in the state. And as we've seen with COVID and with the fires and other climate effects, I anticipate having added pressure to regions like Humboldt County. So we're trying to plan for that. Like many of you, we went through a housing element update recently here, got our housing element certified. And part of that analysis required us to take a look at our vacant sites. On the screen here, you see in red all of the sites that are currently zoned residential that allow for one or more housing units. And so we did that analysis and we came up pretty short. This housing element cycle, we're required to produce 610 units of the county's total production. And as I'm sure you're all aware, the new changes to housing element law make it so you don't just have to show the vacant sites, you actually have to get the production. Otherwise you start seeing penalties. When we went through this analysis, we found that, with the build out of all these red sites, we'd hit about 230 units of our 610. Adding to that, we estimated we get about 80 accessory dwelling units. And then on top of that, we thought we were going to do an annexation that would provide another 89 units. The annexation has since been approved, not at LAFCO yet with that, but I do anticipate, our production over the next 8 years to be able to produce about 211 units less than what we are committed to doing in our housing element, if everything was to be built, and we typically don't see that. So what did we say we'd do in the housing element? We committed to this infill plan, which was part of our strategy for taking sites that had already been developed and either redeveloping them or allowing for additional density. This infill plan focused on areas where we have higher densities or need for changing zoning districts. I'll point to a few here. The purple zoning districts are the industrial ones. The yellow zoning districts are yellow here. And so you can see Craftsman's Mall up here in the upper right-hand corner. That's surrounded by other residential zoning districts. It's relic zoning. If we were to do that on, intentionally, we'd be accused of spot zoning. And we have that same situation throughout town where, maybe the legacy zoning districts don't really match with current needs or current uses. And so we felt like this was a relatively easy lift. If we focused on, Valley West in the north part of town, the Craftsman's Mall area in the center of town, and then Creamery District and the downtown area to try and densify our zoning. And the HCD approved that in our housing element. And so we're committed. That's where we're going. Through that housing element process, we did a lot of public outreach. I wanted to point to this public outreach just real quick, because I think it's important to come forward with a plan that the community has some buy-in on. One of the things that we learned, as some of you may recall from our experience with the Village Project, which was proposing to produce 800 units of student housing in the city of Arcata at that Craftsman's Mall location, is that you can have all the policy that supports infill development all day long. And when the community finds that you're building a 4-story building in their neighborhood, they're going to come out and tell you what they think about it. And so we started learning from that experience. It was excruciating for staff. It was excruciating for the community, the applicant, the decision makers. 17 total meetings, and ultimately the project got put on hold until the investors backed out, and that project has effectively died on the vine. So we wanted to take some lessons learned from that project. One of the things that we heard from the community during that discretionary review was, hey, look, we want to be involved from the start. We want to have a say in what this community looks like. We accept we may need to have larger buildings to meet our housing needs, but it's important for us to voice our ideas about what that that new development would look like. We heard that, we incorporated it, we took that in, and now we're responding to it. So we held a series of workshops when we were developing our housing element, recognizing that we didn't have enough vacant sites to produce our full arena, and sort of talking with the community about this. Really identifying that, doing nothing or saying, well, we're not going to grow isn't an option. Recognizing the state's been putting, pressure on us and housing laws to force us in the direction of creating this density. So we started having the conversation, well, it's not that we're not going to grow, but we need to grow on our terms. How do we do that? This is one of the graphics that was an output from that meeting, or from those series of meetings. We held them in both English and Spanish. And the somewhat inspiring thing about this graphic to me is that the planning work that we had been doing, because we knew as planners that we needed to go in this direction for several years, was being verified and confirmed by our community. The principles that we have in our general plan that would focus us towards infill development, and stay out of the green belts, stay out of the hillsides, not expand our boundaries, but grow within our means. Those were ratified by the community. And in fact, the predominant ideas were focused on accessory dwelling units where you could have, light infill. And we also want to see multi-use development around commercial areas. That, these ideas about this infill in the Creamery District was really embraced by the community. And so we brought that forward in our housing element, and now we're working on that next step. How do we actually make those things happen? I want to take a break here for a second from sort of the direction we're going with the planning, and just recognize that there's lots that goes into building a building. And I think that oftentimes what I've seen in my career is that we often get really myopic about the area of expertise that we have. But it takes a whole host of different policy area sectors, the expertise, and building, both from the professional standpoint and having the boots on the ground. The market has to be there. Lots of things have to align in order to have a successful market for development. It's not just our plans. And so one of the cornerstones of this planning effort is to align development support. And so that's everywhere from trying to, align the workforce to make sure that the, folks are there that can actually build these buildings, checking in with the financing bankers and making sure that what we're proposing is something that's actually lendable, that you can actually, pull a loan on this, or that it's going to make financial sense. And then we also have our piece, which is really the policy sector. And so that's the section that we're really trying to focus on, but making sure that it's aligned with those other sectors. I think that's critical for us to, keep in mind as we're developing these plans. We can, if we plan in a bubble, we can come up with, what we think is the greatest plan ever. But if it's not feasible in the market, it's just not going to get built. So we're trying to avoid having a great plan that never gets built. So the other kind of cornerstone to this whole planning effort is that there's a, this simple thesis around the development triangle. almost every developer I've talked to through my career has said, look, there's these three elements: uncertainty, the time it takes to get approved, and the cost of getting approved. And at some point, that goes into the pro forma. Am I going to pursue this option or not? And generally speaking, when you increase one side of this triangle, it decreases the others. Most say, yes, I would pay to reduce uncertainty and time. If I could pay you to not have to go to the planning commission, if I could pay you to not have to not know whether or not I'm going to be approved if I do go to the planning commission, I'm willing to pay more for that. Generally, what regulation does, however, is it makes things more expensive, more costly, more uncertain, and take more time. And so we're trying to avoid this with our planning effort. We've gone through a couple of iterations on exactly how to do that, but at the end of the day, what we want to result in is a principally permitted pathway for the developments that meet these community objectives. We're going to ask those developers to pay for this. We're planning on doing an EIR to allow for principally permitted by right development that meets these higher densities, provides for economic opportunities and does this intensive infill. We're going to ask folks to pay for that and then go directly to the building counter instead of coming through my office. So, well, I've got some fancy animations here apparently. Let me just bust through these. Maybe not. Okay, there we go. That's the graphic I was looking for. Through this planning work, we looked at a range of different options. We looked at greenfield development to the west of the city over here. This is, actually a pretty logical greenfield expansion if we were going to, because of the, the development that's on the west side here. Infilling in here wouldn't be the same as maybe infilling in this area here, where it's, where it's true greenfield and part of our green belt. Still kind of runs afoul of our green belt policies, but it's a possibility. We want to present that to the community and ask them, is this the direction we should go? With approximately 358 acres using residential low density development, we could produce about 2,600 units, which is more than enough for the next 20 years development, more than likely. Focusing on just that area around the Creamery District here, though, we have about 90 acres. And if we use the current densities, that could produce 2,900 units. And so we presented this to the council, to the planning commission, to the community at large, and we continue to get direction to focus on infill development in and around the downtown. So basically our planning efforts right now are going to be a 20-year plan to accommodate Arcata's growth, basically right in and around the downtown, and then also addressing, as we'd mentioned before, the north side and this valley east, valley west horseshoe, and then also in the middle of the town with some opportunities there. There are other options and opportunities in town, but that's what we're focusing on right now. So let me dive into exactly what we're looking at. So this K Street corridor, here's Samoa Boulevard. Here's our downtown area, K Street that turns into Alliance, and there's that large swath of purple properties, the industrial properties, smashed right in between our economic center and then housing on both sides. Again, legacy zoning that we inherited from a bygone era that is never coming back. And so we still want to make sure that we have industrially zoned properties in the city of Arcata. We have areas for that, both in the north and south side of town, that are remote from other residential uses. And so we're looking at this transitional zone, in particular in the K Street corridor, for new opportunities for infill development. So how do we do that? How do we balance all of these different concerns about size of buildings, all the different policies in the general plan that we argued over with the village project, and still come out whole with the community on meeting those objectives, and not just kind of giving away the bank to developers to say, hey, feel free, come on in, do what you will. We're going through a public process right now to make sure that public, the developers, and other stakeholders have input into this, as I'd mentioned, to make sure that there's alignment and that it's a feasible plan to produce more of a form-based code. So this underlying zoning, we're thinking now, will basically change from industrial to some new zoning type that we'll adopt that will allow for larger scale development, but we still want to be able to make sure that if it's principally permitted, we get the amenities that you would get if you were going through a discretionary process. So part of what we're asking the community right now is, well, what are these amenities that we want? We have a whole bunch of different policy areas. And so, I've selected a few here just so we can, think through this as a thought experiment, taking energy, alternative transportation, and building designs, for example, as policy areas that are important to Arcatans. What specific implementation measures do we want to see in these new developments to make sure that we are both accommodating our growth needs, but also adhering to our underlying policy requirements? So the idea here is that, and I don't know if it's going to be an ABC tiered or what the outcome is going to be ultimately, but that there would be, some level of different options in here. Maybe on the energy side, designing your building so it takes real good advantage of passive solar. That's something that's fairly easy to do. That could be on the A category. And then moving all the way up to the C category where, maybe they'd be committing to, get LEED Gold Plus certified. This whole range of options. The concept that we've been talking about with the community here is that if they come in and select from different implementation measures, incorporate that into their design, and then build to a form-based code, that we would basically give them a principally permitted pathway, get a reimbursement for the planning work that we did, and they would move on to the building counter. So our desired outcomes from all of this, what are they? Right now we're seeing a couple of 3-story buildings, a couple of 4-story buildings go up in Arcata. People are concerned about traffic. They're concerned about parking. They're concerned about, what it's doing to their view shed, how it's shading their houses, et cetera, et cetera. All of these building developments are being done under the existing code, but they're going through a one-off design review process. People are coming out of the woodwork to rail against them, even though we've said for the last 20 years, this is exactly what we want. We're going to go through this process now with, a charrette process to try and bring the community along and find out, do we need larger sidewalks? Do we need slightly bigger setbacks? What are the outcomes that we want to see for design in our community so that we can meet these state objectives and do what we said we were going to do in our housing element? And ultimately, the desired outcomes are to, create a mixed use, mixed income, multi-generational, alternative transportation, home ownership and rental opportunity, form-based pathway for development. I think we can get creative here. I think that, one of the things that's incorporated into the Isaacson's project, for example, is they're offering the residents bus passes. And so there's fewer parking spaces included in that than you would see in other districts. It actually comports with the code. It's a required number of parking spaces, but there are only 14 parking spaces for 44 units. And one of the things we did with that project was to work with them to develop this bus pass program. We're also working with Zipcar to try and get a car share outside of the project as well. And so I think, if we get creative, I know we're not, we don't have high quality public transit in our communities. We don't have buses coming on a 15-minute interval, and we're probably never going to have that. But there are some other ways that we can meet our community needs and still try and move away from everyone having their own, passenger vehicle, so that we can accommodate these infill developments. So those are some of the creative ideas that we've been having. We're getting ready to release our RFP sometime in the next couple of weeks, is my hope, that we'll have our RFP produced and ready for some of this infill planning work. And we're really excited to get started and select a contractor and start working with them on the planning work, the general plan amendments, and EIR to approve all this work. So those those are kind of that's sort of where we're at. That's that's the path we're going to. And so again, I'd encourage some dialogue around where we're going and ideas that you might have. I know some jurisdictions have adopted specific plans to do this. DLO and our staff has been looking at community area plans. And I've also been talking with one of our consultants that's working on another project about maybe just, just doing a basic rezone, like, if we just create this new zone, that will have done it. I'm seeing a couple of questions. Looks like several have been answered already. So I don't know if there's Bob, I don't know if there's a way to do you want to just read these questions and,
Sure.
or do you want to read them, or how do you want to do the Q&A part?
I can do that. So there was a, if you note in the question answer section, a couple different things on Creekside annexation process. Has it been cooperative or resistant so far?
So the Creekside has been approved. We went through, I want to say about 8 public hearings on the Creekside. So it was less resistance, I guess you could say, or less traction anyway than perhaps the Village project had. So that did get approved, and it'll be going to LAFCO soon. I would say that there were some folks who were very cooperative. We had some in the neighborhood, or folks that were familiar with the project, that were very cooperative and helped build conditions of approval that made the project better. And and the applicant was happy to accommodate. We also had some folks that were really not happy with the project and were very resistant, still reluctant, and we'll probably see them at LAFCO.
All right. Another question just regarding like building over in the east area and what kind of negative results. But I thought what was kind of interesting was what and you mentioned it earlier, David, just about generational. Where have we missed developing housing for what types of people? And in this instance, the safety was an issue that was raised here. But what are you hearing from the community as far as the types of housing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's changed over time, is the first thing I'd say. That when we first started talking about this infill planning and larger scale buildings, sort of more of these condominium or apartment style housing types, about 3 years ago, folks said we were crazy. And I think in part that was because most of the folks we were talking to were folks that already lived in Arcata, already had a house, felt like people come to Arcata, come to the North Coast so that they can, own a 6,000 square foot lot with a, their own little slice of the American pie on it. One of the things that we did in the outreach for this thus far, and will continue to do, is that we went beyond Arcata's borders with our outreach engagement. And there's actually a lot of people that don't live in Arcata right now that want to live in Arcata. And so we're taking their ideas into consideration as well, and making sure that, we're planning for people who aren't here as well as for the people that are here. When you're planning for growth, obviously that growth hasn't happened yet. Those people aren't there, and you're constantly asking the people who are here, what should that growth look like? You're going to get really different answers than if you ask the people who would like to be here. And so, I think that the arc of Arcata's housing market has really transitioned through the 70s to be predominantly focused on meeting the student housing needs. And as a result, our housing costs, whether it's for sale or the rental market, have really gotten out of pace with with the underlying market's ability to meet that. And so we see a lot of investment in Arcata in many of the different neighborhoods. If you go in and you select for homeowner exemption for property taxes, you'll see that many of the neighborhoods are 50, 60, 70% rental. And so I think we've missed a lot of different markets as a result of our reluctance to build. For how progressive we are as a community, I think that our desire to maintain this quote unquote small scale character of Arcata has resulted in selecting for a very few. And what we've seen recently with a lot of work that folks at HSU have been doing, and in partnership with the city's housing equity working group that, this is having disproportionate impacts on people of color. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to rectify in this planning effort, is to make sure that there's a, equity component to housing. So I think unless you were, a student who is willing to rent, deferred maintenance property that, some investor, purchased back in the 70s, or were willing to buy a house that was over market and knew you were going to put $100,000 into making it livable, or you already had a house, then you were probably left out of this market. Seniors, students, young first-time home buyers, etc.
And talking of which, I'm losing my student intern because she's getting kicked out of her apartment because the owner can rent it out higher to some of the COVID evacuees that we're getting up here. So we're even seeing changes, the housing change as a result of current affairs. So, have any?
I think that's really legitimate.
Yeah. Have any studies been done since development on how the parking on the streets around the buildings have changed?
We haven't looked at that. You mean for post during COVID? I mean,
no, I'd say during
just in general,
some of the infill development that's been going on.
Right. We haven't done a parking study. That would be interesting to do, but I wouldn't say that parking is is that big of an issue. I mean, I know it all sort of, parking is one of those impacts that really is, dependent on your sort of mindset. If you moved here from San Francisco, you would say there's absolutely no parking problem here. In particular, I don't have to pay $800 a month for a parking space or whatever it is now. I don't drive to downtown a lot, but whenever I do, I never have a problem finding parking, and challenge anyone to tell me that they do. But that is something that's something that we're definitely going to have to keep track of. One of the things that we're trying to plan for in the infill, planning work is to find alternatives to single vehicle transportation models, recognizing it's not going to go away all at once, but also recognizing that we're planning for the future, and so we need to start looking towards what does that future condition look like. I fully anticipate that probably within our lifetimes, the single car ownership will be a thing of the past for many people.
All right, skipping around a little bit here. Several comments. One had to do with the funding idea of how you would be putting effort towards this plan, and then it would be a development impact fee or something in the future. And that would be based on the number of units that you're projecting, I imagine.
That's the idea, yeah.
Well, how does that
compare? So we'll fund this up.
I'm going to say, how does this compare to other development impact fees? And I think it was Wiener that had a bill. I know there was somebody else that had a bill that people were going to have to post their development impact fees online, with the idea that jurisdiction or people were going to be compared to each other. And then the idea was to get rid of some of the development impact fees. Kind of a new thinking at the state level.
I think that's a really good idea. I was in a meeting the other day where, and by that I mean posting, I think if jurisdictions would post their impact fee, I think that would be a good idea. I was in a meeting the other day where one of the participants was saying that developers always complain to them about the cost of the capital connection fees, and I agree. I mean they're exorbitant. Their cost they're high. They're one of the highest fees that you will pay when you come in for a building permit. But the reality of the situation is that, if you can't afford the $15,000 for, capital connection fees, then you probably got other problems going on. And really what I think many of those requests are about are, just trying to, you can't get what you don't ask for. So just trying to find some economies wherever they can. But I do think that, having the more fees, the more rigorous our regulations are, the more reach codes we adopt, the more stringent the building code becomes, the more CEQA process there is. All of these things do add to the cost of development. And really, I think a lot of it is the holding time. One of the things we're trying to eliminate here for the city of Arcata is the time that the developer has to hold a piece of property with that uncertainty when they could be making their money work for them somewhere else. We want to be a desirable place for a developer to come and provide for this community. I want to break down this idea too, that a developer is someone other than. We need developers who build big buildings to build the buildings we need so that we can live in them. And I think that anything we can do to eliminate the costs or ameliorate the costs associated with that, we should do. One of the things that we're including in this strategic infill redevelopment plan is a market study where we're looking at what is the cost of development for different types of developments, and then we're also doing a feasibility fiscal analysis for greenfield development versus infill development. And part of the reason we're doing that is so that we can show the community, not within the context of any specific project, but just in the context of a pro forma for a generalized project, what it actually costs to get one of these developments to market. And we also want to do that. So again, we are providing a plan that is feasible. We can dream all day long about 10-story buildings, but they're not feasible here. And so I think that if you have your impact fees up front and you let people know what you're doing, what it's going to cost to develop, they can plug that into their pro forma. The more transparent the government can be, the jurisdictions can be about what the full cost of development in their community is going to be, the better chance that they have at having successful projects, successful relationships, and building that network of resources that are needed to meet our our housing and economic development needs.
We have a comment about bike storage areas, but when we think about VMT and then encouraging active transportation, are these things you're anticipating to be included in some of the amenities?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that we had a lot of conversations through the Village Project, for example, about how you can't ride your bicycle in Humboldt County because it rains. But I think that is just not really true. I think many students ride their bikes, whether because they don't have another option or not. But it is kind of, the infrastructure isn't built there. We have a huge infrastructure for motor vehicles. And you can see in the picture that's on the screen right now, generally the infrastructure we provide for bicycles is maybe a place to lock it up outside where it's going to get rusty and stolen. And so I think it's really important to include indoor storage for alternative transportation modes. Folks, electric bikes are becoming more common now. I see folks driving all around on electric bikes these days where maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. We need to provide an infrastructure for them to be able to keep that bike safe when they get to their location, whether it's their house or their place of work or the university, if that's where they're going. So I think getting real creative about how we link the various networks of transportation modes together is critical for all of the jurisdictions in making a shift towards infill.
All right. There was a question here about mentioning public input processes tend to be dominated by the voices of people already here who own a home. We see new units as a threat to safety, housing value, and other things. In a new planning process, can there be space to hear the voices of people who don't live in Arcata now but would like to?
Absolutely, we've already done that. We've had our public outreach at various events that are outside our jurisdiction. We've gone to McKinleyville, we've gone to Eureka, we went to the Friday night markets, we've been to Little League games. We posted up at Farmers Market, which draws people from all over the county. In Arcata, we've also gone to some shopping stores outside of the jurisdiction. I think it's critical to talk to people in general in the county. I mean, we're building a database and ideas that can be shared as well. But it's also important to, talk to folks that don't have opportunity now. And we are absolutely expanding our outreach way beyond just holding a public hearing where, someone who has the financial resources and the stability and mental capacity to come to that public meeting. We're making sure that we're accessible. We're holding meetings in, Spanish and English. We're doing stakeholder-based outreach. We're doing networking-based outreach. And we're going to continue that through this entire process to make sure that we are getting to people who are traditionally marginalized and ensuring that their voice is reflected in this this planning work. Because you're absolutely right. If you ask the majority of folks, if you ask them, do you want this building next to your house? They're going to say no. And if you ask them why, it's largely because they feel like they're losing something that, that belongs to them. The fact of the matter is that that building, is the future of Arcata. It belongs to the future people of Arcata. And so we need to balance those needs.
All right. I skipped a few questions here. I'm trying to think if anybody else has other questions they want to put into the question and answer session. Ideas about the charrette. You mentioned a charrette, which is typically getting community involvement. You've been already doing that, as you just mentioned. What do you think is the focus of a charrette in this instance? And let me add on to that is, how involved have the property owners been in that area?
We've been very engaged with the property owners in the K Street corridor, Creamery District area.
Okay.
And making sure that we're bringing them along through the process. The charrette may be a little bit of strong a term. I use this and it makes some folks working in our department, a little nervous. What I think we're ultimately going to do is we're going to contract to have a couple of designs that meet the needs of our housing element, the commitment that we made in the housing element put together, and we'll be sharing that with the community. And so we're not going to start from ground zero and say, what do you all want? We're going to start with some ideas about how we can meet what our objectives are. And I'm looking forward to that process in particular because, I like a lot of the times I like to take folks down either a mental walk or an actual physical walk from the K Street corridor and have them, look at it with fresh eyes. Part of the reason we're calling this a redevelopment plan is because not only do we have legacy, zoning in that area, but we have legacy buildings and we have some of the poorest design and most ramshackle, buildings on the K Street corridor. I hate to say it, it's my city. I love it, but the truth of the matter is that this is with the extension of Foster connecting 101 to the Alliance. The K Street corridor is a gateway to Arcata, and when you turn onto that gateway, when you turn onto the gateway in Willits, you have this nice sign that says "Welcome to Willits." You turn on the gateways in other communities, they put their best foot forward, and unfortunately, you turn into the gateway in Arcata, and you don't get that same sort of je ne sais quoi about what's going on here. So we'd like to turn the corner there for that and make sure that we can redevelop that area, kind of improve the area, get some new investment, and provide for housing and equity and economic development opportunities in there. I think I lost the thread of the question, but that's okay.
No, you did it. So sounds good. All right. Well, I think it's maybe time to wrap it up. I don't see any more questions. I don't know if there's any more comments to go over on this. It's an exciting project and a large endeavor. And if people have questions, you want to post Dilo's contact information? That was a joke. Anyway.
I can hear her laughing in the next office over. No, you absolutely can reach out to Dilo or myself. We'll be hopefully having the RFP out soon. I know some of you on the call may be interested in responding to that RFP. So appreciate your comments and questions and ideas. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us. Love to chat about this stuff.
All right, great. Well, thank you for sharing. And I know there was a couple of questions about recording. So we did record this. Tomorrow, if you're registered or you missed this, you will get a link to YouTube where the recording of this will be. So again, thank you, David, for sharing, and thank you, our audience. And again, we will be in touch with you on future programs, and we'll see you next year.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.
Have a good one.